Hello, Sarah Sabin, transformational leadership and business coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am thrilled to be here today with Deirdre McGettrick, who is CEO and co-founder of youfurnish.com. Deirdre, pleased to have you here. And would you like to introduce yourself to my audience?
Indeed. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. So as mentioned, I am the founder of youfurnish.com. Youfurnish.com is an online furniture search platform. It brings all the furniture retailers, John Lewis, Wayfair, Habitat, Heels, Soho Home, Tesco Home, onto one website with all of the products to make searching for furniture easy for the consumer. So you can think about it very similar to solutions like Rightmove when we're looking for homes, or Auto Trader if we're looking for a car. Ultimately, you click out and you buy directly from the furniture retailer. And it was all inspired, Sarah, by basically trying to solve my own frustration of finding furniture after I bought my first home.
Yes, I was going to ask you what inspired the idea.
Well, it goes way back. So I was working in finance in London. You can tell from the accent, I am originally Irish, but I've been living in the UK for over 12 years now. And when I bought this first apartment, I was so excited to finally be able to have all these inspirational sources from, social media to a hotel that you're in, that you see something, or a friend's house or magazine, wherever it might be, the TV. And as a child, I loved interior design. That was my passion. So I used to be cutting up the Argus catalogue, waiting for the property section of the newspaper and creating my own designs. So I was so excited to finally be able to furnish something how I wanted. And that's when frustration struck, because all these beautiful things you see in market, I couldn't find them. So I thought, why isn't there an easy way to search all the products from all the retailers, not just the known ones, but also on the brands that I don't know as well?
Wow. And it's so interesting because you hear this kind of like dynamic again and again where an entrepreneur is like passionate about a specific topic, and then they come across a problem, and then they're like, oh, the frustration sets in. And then out of that is born the idea. And then obviously the rest becomes history. So I would love to know more about your entrepreneurial journey and what you consider to be the most significant challenges that you've faced in growing your business to its current stage. So from what I understand, you've been going about 4 years now, right? Is that correct?
Correct, yes. So I suppose from the outset, it's maybe worth stating that I never set out to be an entrepreneur. I never had ambitions to start a business. I did have ambitions to lead a business. So I always thought I would lead banking, maybe go into one of the clients that I was working for, be their CFO, CEO, work my way up within an organization like that. That was sort of my ambition. So when this frustration sort of came in, I realized, okay, so here's the example that I could actually bring together that leadership ability that I thought I hadn't wanted to pursue. But now I could do it in the area I was most passionate about. Furniture and furnishings won't even feel like work. And it doesn't. Now, in terms of the biggest challenge, back to your question, well, it's everything. So as you're going through the journey of setting up a company and a business, you're learning so many things along the way. And everything that's the biggest challenge is what you're doing right. What is the next step I need to do to complete to get it to the next phase? So answering that question, I can tell you what my biggest challenge is today, but actually at each stage there was different challenge, whether it was raising funds, whether it was bringing on a team, whether it was trying to create a culture remotely during COVID where nobody had even met each other. There was all a lot of challenges along the way. Like, I would have never thought that you could have a company without having an office, without having a HQ. I would have never thought I could work from home. And I've been doing it now, and I'm quite enjoying it. There's downsides to it as well as the pros, but it's like every single thing that you're doing when it's new is a challenge. And then you've got iterations of it. So you're hiring again. And then your next challenge is, well, how do I make sure that, whatever could have been better with maybe one of the first hires, if it's somebody that's moved on and you're looking at bringing in somebody else into the role, were they technical enough? Were they able to scale in line with the business? Did they have the initiative, the get up and go, whether the cultural fit, how can you do that better. So you're constantly learning along the way. And I would say nearly everything is a challenge. And the things that aren't a challenge, you don't even think about them because they're just done and you're on to the next thing.
Yeah, I love that, because essentially there can be this perception that when you get to a certain point, then things will get a bit easier or the challenges will fade. And you're right, it's just that it becomes a different sort of challenge as you grow. So the challenges you have at the beginning are not the same challenges you have when you're at the sort of multi-million revenue mark, because you're thinking about scaling up, you're thinking more seriously and intentionally about culture and recruiting the right people and attracting the right people. So it becomes a different quality of challenge. And I think when, people get comfortable with that concept, they're like, oh, okay, cool. This is just a new thing that I have to navigate in my journey.
So what I'm constantly doing, because I have a great network around me of people that have been founders, people that have been in businesses that have scaled, is when I've got a question, it'll be like, what did you do? What did you do at that point in the business, 10 years ago? Not where you are today, because where they are today is not the answer for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what I need to understand is, where did you start? Where did you get to when you were this phase of your business? And then I'm also looking for, and what did you discover after that? So now that you're 10 years into your business, what about the decision when you were at my stage would you have changed along the way to make it easier in the future? Because you can build the all singing, all dancing solution that somebody has figured out, but it might be different now given technology. It might be different for your business, for your sector. But what you're trying to get is as much information as you can to make the right decision. And building the all singing, all dancing solution isn't always right. You need the solution to get you to the next stage. Because building it for 10 stages forward, you never get to 10 stages forward. That was a waste of time, potentially a waste of money. You could have been doing other things more valuable. So you're trying to balance all of those elements, I find, with where you're faced with a challenge, is understanding what it means for your stage of business, trying to get as much input that you can to make the best decision at that time.
And I'd like to also raise the point that sometimes it isn't clear what the right decision is. And then it becomes about taking the best decision you can make in the circumstances with the knowledge and experience you have. Because one of the number one qualities of successful people is they actually take decisions. And as long as you can do that, if it doesn't pan out the way you want, okay, well, the next step you look at, what do we do now and how do we do it differently next time?
Yeah, so I've had a few scenarios like that as well, where it's unclear whether it's A or B, and we'd make a decision like, right, we're going to go with B. We think B is the right answer. And sometimes you can see it so quickly. It was like, oh, that's not right. It doesn't work. And, when you're 2 days into strategy B being implemented, I'm like, oh, that was the wrong decision. We should have went for A. Then you've got to manage as well, because you don't want to be flip-flopping too much within your team. That can cause chaos. So you have to bring everybody else on the journey with you as well, around what can you see at that early stage and how can you make that visible to others so that they can understand, and then that you can also get their inputs, because what you can see is only part of it. I'm always thinking about, what have I not seen, what have I not thought of? So how can I sort of share my knowledge around what I see, get their input, so that when we go with A, we know about the other things. So it's not that you'll always make the right decisions, but it's continually reevaluating. And as you get more information, how do you actually take that on board and not be afraid to pivot and say, you know what, that was the wrong decision, right? But now we know that because we've got this extra information, let's take it and let's go down this other path instead. So be nimble enough, to move and to change, really, really important.
Yeah, and I agree, especially so nowadays, because things change faster than ever before. And, there is no such thing as a 3-year plan that you have and you don't deviate from anymore. It's this constant evaluation, tweaking, leveraging what's working, cutting what's not working, in order that you can pivot and navigate your way to, well, whatever ultimate success looks like.
Indeed.
I love that. So, you've talked a little bit about your team and how to incorporate them. I'd love to know more about how you define strong leadership and how you see the impact of strong leadership on your business.
Yes, so this is an area that like I think is so fascinating, and it's such an interesting conversation to have with other businesses and how they're leading and how they're seeing it. I think it's about number one, having no ego. So how do you actually listen really carefully and be objective then to what's the right decision for the business, taken out where I've sort of seen in previous cases where you'd have somebody that, was driven by, well, I want my division to do this, or I want to have X number of hires. So I think we should hire this person in this role, even though it might not be the best role for the business, for example, to hire. So I think it's removing ego so that you can be objective in your decision making and do the right next thing for the company, taking on board the opinions of everybody as well that's needed to have an opinion. And that's one thing as well that, it's not about, I think sometimes as well that we've democratized a lot, but ultimately somebody has to make a decision in companies, and not everybody will agree with that decision. So I think for really good leadership, it's about making clear that I'm gathering input so that I can make a decision. I want your opinion, it's really important. But then once we make a call, the company as a whole need to stand behind that and go with it, even if you had apprehensions about it. And indeed, as we sort of previously said, maybe when new information comes to light, you do go down a different route that one person originally thought. But it's about getting behind the team and the decisions that are made at the time, and how, as a leader, you can make everybody feel included and not isolated because maybe they didn't think that was the best thing to do as well. So I think it's about making sure everybody is on the same page.
Yes, 100%. And I like the way that you have flocked the balance between collaborative decision making and someone actually making the decision when it needs to be made. Because unfortunately, again, if no decision is made, then the company gets stuck. And it can be difficult sometimes to find that balance, because when you are the person that ultimately takes the decision, you then have to get buy-in from your team, which, depending on how you lead, is not always simple. But I'd love to know more about how you get that buy-in from your team when you ultimately are like, right, we're doing path A here.
Yes. Now, I think this is really, really important. Ever so much today, where, especially with personalization in our news feeds on our social media, we see more opinions like us. So we don't see that much disagreement with us. So that's dangerous. We think everybody all around the world, they're all just in agreement, and that's not true. So what you need to make sure in the company as well is that you've got those differences of opinion coming out. And if they're not coming out, I wonder whether, number one, people are actually communicating. So how do you provide a safe space for people to communicate when you're on a call with 8 people and 7 people are saying we should do X, and one person is sitting there thinking, I think we should do Y. I want to hear that. Why is that? That's really interesting. You think we should do Y. What have we all not considered? Have we all been too quick with rushing over to the most obvious thing? So what is some of the learnings that you can take from some of the voices that have a different opinion? But it's really important, I think, to create that culture whereby people can speak up, whereby people can share their opinion, and regardless of seniority as well. A lot of people early on in their career, they sit there and they think, oh, I was going to say this, but I was too afraid to. So one thing I always say to my team is that we're all purchasers of furniture. And actually the people that are at the very top probably haven't purchased furniture as much as you might have done. And you've recently bought a house. So actually, although you might be one of the most junior people on the team, you are the most important opinion as far as I'm concerned. that I want to hear from, because you're a real life example of our customers. So that is a nice thing about what we do, is that every single one of the team is also a potential customer of youfurnish.com, as well as on the team of building the company up. So it's really about creating that safety that people can speak up and share their opinions. And then, of course, that you manage it respectfully, try not to dismiss it too quickly. Because again, if you're already going, oh, we're definitely doing X, X is that, what have you not heard? And often what I find is that I'll go away and I'll sleep and I'm like, oh, that's what that was. Oh, yes, 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 yes. So how do you then as well give yourself enough time to actually think it through, rather than the first initial reaction that you have when something is said? That's a really important part that I've been learning, because in the beginning I was much too quick getting to the solution. It's where I need to slow it down a little bit.
I love that. Slow down to speed up is one of my favorite quotes. And I just want to pick up on a few points that you've made. So number one, psychological safety. It is the foundation of high-performing teams. So everyone feeling safe to express what's on their hearts and minds. And then the second thing there is really taking feedback from people on the front line, because it can be so easy to be like, okay, well, I as the leader know best, but you are not necessarily the person in closest contact with the customer base, and in your case your employees are your potential customers. So it's really, really important to listen to that, so that you make the best decisions that you can make at that stage in time. And I think, to tie into something that you said earlier about seeking advice from people that have been in the same situation, and have had businesses, and, getting that mentorship, that is important. But so is also talking to people and listening to people from all walks of life, because everyone has something to bring to the table.
And one of the things that I heard recently is that if you're not having heated conversations, you're not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So do you have a diverse enough team if everybody's just in agreement? What are you missing out? Look at your hiring. Are you bringing in diversity so that you have other voices at the table? I think that's really important. So if you're not having that feedback coming through, number one, have you created the environment that people can share it if they have it? But number two, do you have enough diversity in your team to bring those diverse opinions?
Yes, and it can be difficult to build that diverse team, because we all have unconscious biases. We all are inclined to surround ourselves with people like us. And it's not from people like us that we learn the most. So within a team, alignment at a values level is important. But aside from that, you want people coming from different angles, with different skill sets, with different backgrounds, in order that you get that diversity of opinion that you just can't get when you have a lot of people exactly like you around the table.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to know more about how you've invested in yourself as a leader, and what steps have you taken to grow and evolve as a leader?
Yes, yes. So I think number one, growth is painful. It's not necessarily nice, at times, because you should always be self-evaluating. And one thing that I will say is that I've played a lot of sport growing up. So I'm always actually looking for the constructive criticism. When you tell me what's working, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what I've done wrong, because that's what I can learn from, and that's how I get to the next level. But I don't always want to hear what's wrong either. I'm like, I don't do that. And then you sort of take it away and you're like, well, maybe I do. Yeah, I definitely do that. So to me, it's number one, becoming aware of something that you do. And one of the things that I've learned, Sarah, as well, is that often I become aware, somebody says, you do this. I'm like, do I? I don't think I do. And then I see it in somebody else. I'm like, oh, that's really annoying when that person does that. And then I do it and I'm like, oh, you've just done it there. Oh yeah. So it's like awareness that it exists, then awareness of the impact that it might be. And then you can go about taking steps to stop it. So when you do it, how do you then bring yourself back from it? Because I think you can't always just immediately catch it. So how do you reverse it? And then in time, you'll sort of catch yourself before you do it. So before I react too quickly, I'm like, this is where if you say what you're thinking, you're going to cut the conversation off too soon. You haven't had enough time to digest that information. Take that away. So, I don't need to have a solution at every moment, I think is one thing I was always doing. So it's like, that's really interesting. Let me think about that in my head and how it fully would work. And then you can come back once you've actually had a chance to think about it. But, first off, do you know that you react too quickly? No, I wasn't aware of that. And then you see somebody else doing it. Oh, when they do that, that's really annoying. And then I react too quickly on the spot and I'm like, but actually maybe that's not the right answer. So let me take it away. And then the next time I'll be like, oh, let me just take that away because I want to think about it a little bit more so I fully understand the implications of it. So it's like a process is the way that I look at it around that. And I have loads of examples because, I suppose in terms of how I tried to develop books, really, really good. I love speaking to other people. It's like, I have this conversation, I have this situation, how would you deal with it? And getting them to talk me through situations where they've been through it and done it. And it is just that experience thing as far as I'm concerned, Sarah. So, you will come across these situations in business. Most problems are the same across all businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, if I'm having it, they've probably had it. How do I learn? What did they do? How can I take some of their wisdom along the way as well when I'm learning that? And a lot of things as well, I think that you nearly have to make those mistakes along your journey at some point. You can't avoid it all as much as you want to, because when you're listening to somebody talk about a problem, I've discovered is that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, but it's not relevant to me. So I discount it. I don't have that problem. So I'm not really listening. And then all of a sudden, a year later, you come across that situation in your business and that's the challenge. You're like, right, what are they really, really saying now? Because this is when I really need to listen. So I think there's that element of you can listen and have all the answers in the world, but actually until that stage of business is ready for you, you're not really open and fully to listening to it.
Yes. I think, the timing is right for things that you learn along the way. And we potentially have a tendency to be like, okay, well, I need to learn all about this right now. But actually you don't, because it will become something that you're committed to learning about further down the line because you can see the relevance of it at that stage.
Exactly.
Okay, so the final question that I always ask everyone, and I challenge them to answer it relatively concisely. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Speak up and ask questions. Don't be afraid thinking, I can't ask this question in this room full of important people, little old me. That'll be probably a stupid question, so I won't answer it or I won't ask it. And I think that's it, is you have this amazing thing at the beginning of your career where you can be like a sponge and just take that opportunity. And you should never stop it, by the way, just because you're in your early career, you can ask questions versus later you can't. I don't believe in that, but I think ask the questions. And, I'm not saying ask every question in every room. You'd be there all day probably asking them. But, make your list and then go to a safe person later on and say, somebody was talking about this. I didn't understand it. What was it? But, don't be afraid to speak up and ask questions.
Yeah, 100%. And I think actually that really applies at a later stage where people are self-conscious about asking questions because they're like, oh, I don't want people to think I don't know this or I'm not an expert in this. So yeah, I love that. And I love this conversation, Deirdre. So thank you very much for today. And for my listeners, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you're interested in taking part in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series, please do feel free to reach out to me. Thank you and bye for now.